Watch this. This is amazing. Oh, here we go.
Can I just first ask, the health of the president's always news. Your voice sounds a little rough. Are you feeling all right?
I feel great. I was shouting at people because they were stupid about something having to do with trade in a country, and I straightened it out. But I blew my stack at these people.
We got Bill and Hillary Clinton. Okay, there's a bunch of bots that are out. Okay, like just fucking cranking messages. I don't know if you've seen this, dude. I have noticed, guys. For me on Twitter, the minute I post about Epstein and Trump, I will get sometimes 2, sometimes 10 accounts all basically saying the same thing about Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton. But like,
okay, so just when you thought Trump's legal situation couldn't possibly get any worse, just when he's facing Supreme Court rulings stripping his immunity, witnesses collapsing on the stand, impeachment articles being filed, and Pam Bondi heading to prison, a bombshell just dropped that could eclipse everything else we've been covering. Trump was forced to sign the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which means tens of thousands of pages of government records about Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking network are about to be released to the public. And here's the kicker. These aren't just any documents. We're talking about files that detail Trump's connections to Epstein, pardons that may have protected key players in the scandal, secret meetings involving Trump's inner circle, and immunity deals that shielded co-conspirators for years. This is Trump's absolute worst nightmare coming true because unlike his other legal troubles, where he can claim political persecution or argue about legal technicalities, the Epstein connection is something the public viscerally understands and finds completely unacceptable. Sex trafficking of minors isn't a partisan issue. It's something that disgusts people across the political spectrum. And Trump spent months fighting against releasing these files, which makes it look like he had something to hide. Now that he's been forced to sign this Transparency Act under massive political and legal pressure, all of those documents are going to become public within 30 days. The implications are absolutely staggering because we're already seeing leaked emails and documents that show Trump spending significant time with Epstein being discussed in correspondence between Epstein and his victims and being referenced as what whistleblowers are calling a key protection asset for Epstein's operation. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
You know what I'm saying? But they did not have a relationship like Trump and Epstein did. They did not. They were not like best buddies and confidants. In the 90s, Trump and Epstein were literally best friends. Oh, shit. Dude, she's not wrong, dude. Dude, Trump absolutely had Epstein killed. Dude, Trump, he's going down, boss. He is going down.
So I'm for I don't, they can do whatever they want. We'll give them everything. Sure, I would. Let the Senate look at it. Let anybody look at it. But don't talk about it too much because, honestly, I don't want to take it away from us. It's really a Democrat problem. The Democrats were Epstein's friends.
Oh, sure, Trumpy. Oh.
All of them. And it's a hoax. The whole thing is a hoax.
Oh.
And I don't want to take it away from really the greatness of what the Republican Party has accomplished over the last period of time. So,
dude, look at him though. Guys, do you see how perturbed he is, boss?
Now let's talk about why Trump reversed course and signed this bill after fighting it for months, because that timing and context tells you everything about how desperate his situation has become. Trump initially resisted congressional demands to release the Epstein files despite bipartisan pressure from lawmakers, despite victims demanding transparency, despite investigative journalists uncovering new connections. He clearly didn't want these documents to see the light of day, which raises obvious questions about what's in them that he's so worried about. But the political pressure became overwhelming when even MAGA allies started calling for release of the files, and when victims of Epstein's trafficking went public demanding accountability. Trump couldn't maintain his opposition without looking like he was actively covering up a sex trafficking scandal, which would be politically catastrophic, even for someone with his ability to survive controversies. So he signed the bill in what's being described as a stunning policy reversal, but the damage is already done because his months of resistance have created the perception that he's got damaging secrets in those files. And the documents that have already been published are confirming those suspicions by revealing details about Trump's associations with Epstein that go far beyond what was previously known publicly. We're talking about personal letters, references to secret meetings, discussions in Epstein's correspondence about Trump's potential role in protecting the operation. This isn't circumstantial guilt by association. This is documentary evidence that Trump was significantly more involved with Epstein than he's ever publicly admitted. Here's what makes this Epstein file situation so uniquely dangerous for Trump compared to his other legal troubles. Sex trafficking scandals destroy people in ways that other crimes don't. You can survive allegations of financial fraud by arguing everyone does it, or by claiming technical compliance with complex regulations. You can survive obstruction charges by saying you were just fighting back against unfair investigations. You can even survive some level of corruption allegations by framing them as standard political deal-making. But you absolutely cannot survive being connected to a sex trafficking ring that exploited minors, and you definitely can't survive if documents show you used presidential powers like pardons to protect people involved in that trafficking. The visceral public reaction to anything involving exploitation of children is immediate and unforgiving. Trump's base might stick with him through financial scandals or political controversies, but connections to Epstein's operation could break even that loyalty because nobody wants to be seen as defending someone associated with sex trafficking. The media coverage of these document releases is going to be absolutely relentless, with daily revelations about new connections, new meetings, new evidence of Trump's involvement with Epstein's network. And unlike Trump's other legal battles where he can attack prosecutors as politically motivated, it's much harder to dismiss documents that he himself was forced to release through legislation he signed. The authenticity and credibility of these files is going to be nearly impossible to challenge. The specific revelations that are already emerging from preliminary document releases are absolutely devastating and suggest the full file dump is going to be even worse. Reports indicate that emails show Epstein and his inner circle referring to Trump as a protection asset, meaning they viewed Trump as someone who could use his influence and power to shield the operation from consequences. That's not just casual social friendship, that's active participation in a criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice and protect sex traffickers. Documents show Trump spending time with Epstein in contexts that go beyond the social events and parties that Trump has previously acknowledged. We're talking about private meetings, personal correspondence, discussions about specific individuals and situations related to the trafficking operation. The references to pardons and immunity deals are particularly explosive because they suggest Trump may have used presidential power to protect Epstein associates from prosecution. If that's confirmed by the files that get released, we're looking at potential criminal charges for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to harbor fugitives, and possibly even complicity in the underlying sex trafficking crimes, depending on what Trump knew and when he knew it. Congressional investigators and media outlets are warning that the full scope of the revelations could permanently alter Trump's political future and trigger new criminal investigations that make his current legal troubles look minor by comparison. Let's break down exactly what the Epstein Files Transparency Act requires and why this legislation represents such a massive threat to Trump and potentially other powerful figures. The law mandates that within 30 days, the Department of Justice and FBI must release all unclassified records related to Epstein's criminal networks. This isn't limited to Epstein himself. It includes files on his associates, his co-conspirators, anyone who facilitated or benefited from his trafficking operation. The legislation specifically calls out pardons, immunity negotiations, and case closings as categories that must be disclosed. That language is absolutely crucial because it means the public is going to learn about any deals that were cut to protect people in Epstein's orbit, any pardons that Trump granted to shield co-conspirators from prosecution, any immunity agreements that let key figures avoid accountability. The only redactions allowed are for victim privacy, which means Trump can't claim national security or executive privilege to keep documents sealed. The bipartisan passage of this act is significant because it means both Democrats and Republicans in Congress decided the public interest in transparency outweighed any concerns about political fallout or embarrassing revelations about powerful people. When you get that kind of bipartisan agreement on something this sensitive, it tells you the evidence of cover-up and corruption must be overwhelming. The documents that have already been published through preliminary releases and leaks are providing a preview of what's coming when the full file dump happens. And what's emerging is absolutely damning for Trump. New emails reveal details about Trump's associations with Epstein that contradict Trump's public statements about barely knowing him or only encountering him at social events. We're seeing correspondence where Epstein discusses Trump in ways that suggest close personal relationship and mutual interests in activities that are clearly related to the trafficking operation. References to client lists that include Trump's name are surfacing, which, if confirmed, would mean Trump wasn't just socially acquainted with Epstein, but was actually participating in the crimes. Mentions of secret meetings between Trump and Epstein during periods when Trump has claimed they weren't in contact are documented in emails and calendar records. Personal letters between the two show familiarity and coordination that goes far beyond casual friendship. All of this documentary evidence is creating a picture of Trump as deeply embedded in Epstein's network rather than peripherally associated through unfortunate social connections. And remember, these are just the preliminary leaks and releases. The full Transparency Act disclosure is going to include tens of thousands of additional pages that presumably contain even more damaging material. The role of pardons in this scandal is potentially the most explosive aspect because it would represent Trump using official presidential power to obstruct justice and protect sex traffickers. Reports indicate that some of the files detail pardons that Trump granted or considered granting to individuals connected to Epstein's operation. If documents show Trump pardoned someone specifically to prevent them from testifying or cooperating with investigations into Epstein's network, that's a clear-cut case of obstruction of justice that could result in criminal charges. Even if Trump didn't explicitly state that obstruction was his motive, prosecutors could prove corrupt intent by showing the pattern of pardons benefiting Epstein associates combined with Trump's efforts to resist releasing the Epstein files. The pardon power is nearly absolute under the Constitution, but it's not completely unlimited. If a president uses it as part of a criminal conspiracy or to obstruct justice in a way that personally benefits him, that could constitute impeachable conduct and potentially prosecutable crimes. The Supreme Court has never fully resolved how far the pardon power extends when it's being abused to cover up presidential wrongdoing, but Trump's situation might force that legal question to be answered definitively. And given how harshly the Supreme Court has been ruling against Trump recently, there's every reason to think they wouldn't look favorably on pardons used to shield sex traffickers. Let's talk about Pam Bondi's role in this scandal, because she's already facing prison time for obstruction in other matters, and her handling of the Epstein investigation while serving in Trump's administration adds another dimension to her criminal exposure. Reports suggest Bondi was involved in decisions about how aggressively to pursue investigations into Epstein's network, about whether to grant immunity to certain individuals, about what files to keep sealed versus make public. If documents show Bondi actively worked to protect Epstein associates or to cover up Trump's connections to the scandal, that's additional evidence of obstruction that could result in more criminal charges on top of what she's already facing. The files might also reveal coordination between Bondi and other Trump officials to selectively release or withhold information in ways designed to minimize political damage rather than serve justice. Congressional investigators are specifically looking at whether the Trump administration deliberately stalled and manipulated the release of Epstein files to protect the president and his allies. Media outlets and Democrats are already accusing the administration of doing exactly that based on preliminary evidence, and the full file release is likely to provide definitive proof if such manipulation occurred. Bondi's involvement in any cover-up would explain why she fought so hard to keep evidence sealed and why she's now facing such serious legal consequences as the whole operation unravels. The broader network of protection that these files are expected to expose goes far beyond just Trump and includes potentially dozens of powerful figures who benefited from or facilitated Epstein's trafficking operation. Whistleblower accounts suggest the files contain information about politicians, business leaders, entertainment figures, and others who either participated in Epstein's crimes or helped shield him from consequences. The reference to Trump as a protection asset implies there were others filling similar roles, using their influence and power to prevent investigations from getting too close, to ensure key witnesses didn't cooperate, to make sure prosecutions got derailed or limited in scope. When the full files get released, we're likely to see a cascade of revelations about just how extensive this protection network was and how many people were involved in keeping Epstein's operation running for decades. Each new name that emerges is going to trigger its own investigations, its own media firestorm, its own political and legal consequences. The ripple effects could take down numerous powerful figures and could fundamentally change public understanding of how elite criminal networks operate with seeming impunity. This isn't just about Trump, it's about exposing an entire system of corruption and complicity that allowed horrific crimes against children to continue because the people involved were too powerful or too well connected to face accountability. The investigative journalism that's already happening around the Epstein files is uncovering connections and patterns that are going to fuel years of additional reporting and analysis. News organizations have teams of reporters going through the preliminary documents looking for leads and connections. They're cross-referencing names and dates with flight logs, with property records, with financial transactions, with testimony from victims and witnesses. They're building comprehensive maps of Epstein's network that show who knew whom, who met with whom, who benefited financially or politically from association with Epstein. This investigative work is going to accelerate dramatically once the full file dump happens and tens of thousands of additional pages become available for analysis. We're likely to see daily bombshell stories as reporters uncover new evidence of criminality and cover-up. The media attention is going to be absolutely relentless, with every major news outlet dedicating significant resources to covering the scandal. For Trump, this means months or years of negative headlines about his Epstein connections dominating the news cycle at exactly the time when he's trying to defend himself against multiple other legal and political crises. The cumulative impact of all this negative coverage is going to be psychologically and politically devastating, even before any new criminal charges get filed. So where does this Epstein file situation leave Trump in terms of his overall legal jeopardy and political viability? The short answer is that this could be the scandal that finally destroys him completely, because unlike his other legal troubles, connections to sex trafficking cut through partisan divisions and create universal revulsion. Trump's base has stuck with him through financial fraud allegations, through obstruction charges, through impeachments, through Supreme Court rebukes. But if documents definitively prove Trump was significantly involved with Epstein's trafficking network, if they show he used pardons to protect sex traffickers, if they reveal he was what whistleblowers call a protection asset for the operation, that's going to be impossible for even his most loyal supporters to defend. We're talking about crimes against children, which is the one issue that transcends political tribalism. Parents across the political spectrum are going to be horrified by evidence that Trump was connected to child sex trafficking, and that horror is going to translate into complete collapse of whatever remaining political support he has. Republican politicians who've been trying to figure out how to distance themselves from Trump now have the perfect justification. They can say that defending someone connected to Epstein's crimes is simply beyond the pale and that they have no choice but to call for accountability. The criminal exposure that Trump faces from the Epstein files is potentially even more serious than the charges he's already dealing with, because sex trafficking and conspiracy to obstruct justice in trafficking cases carry extremely harsh sentences. Federal sex trafficking charges can result in life in prison, especially when minors are involved. Obstruction charges related to protecting sex traffickers are treated much more seriously than obstruction in other contexts, because courts view interference with trafficking investigations as enabling continued harm to vulnerable victims. If prosecutors can prove Trump used pardons or other presidential powers to shield Epstein associates, that's conspiracy to obstruct justice, which carries its own substantial penalties. The cumulative sentences Trump could face if charged and convicted on Epstein-related crimes could easily exceed anything he's facing in his other cases. And these charges would be much harder to defend against because the documentary evidence is going to be overwhelming once the files get released. Trump can't claim the documents are fake when he himself signed the legislation ordering their release. He can't argue this is politically motivated prosecution when Republicans join Democrats in demanding transparency. The visceral nature of the underlying crimes makes jury sympathy essentially impossible. Nobody's going to feel bad for someone accused of protecting child sex traffickers. The political ramifications of the Epstein files go far beyond Trump personally and could reshape American politics in fundamental ways by exposing how elite criminal networks operate with protection from powerful figures. If the files reveal that numerous politicians, business leaders, and other influential people were involved in or knew about Epstein's trafficking operation, the public backlash is going to be massive and could fuel populist movements that target establishment figures across both parties. The revelation that wealthy and powerful people engaged in or protected sex trafficking of minors, while ordinary Americans faced harsh prosecution for far less serious crimes, is going to reinforce public cynicism about two-tier justice systems. It could trigger reforms aimed at preventing future cover-ups, new laws requiring transparency about criminal investigations involving public figures, new oversight mechanisms to ensure prosecutors aren't pressured to go easy on well-connected defendants, new whistleblower protections to encourage people to come forward about elite criminal activity. The Epstein scandal could become a watershed moment that fundamentally changes how Americans view their political and business leaders, and that creates sustained pressure for accountability that transcends normal political cycles. The 30-day timeline for the file release means we're going to see this story dominate headlines constantly as the deadline approaches, and then as documents start becoming public. Media organizations are going to be covering the countdown with daily speculation about what revelations are coming. Victims and their advocates are going to be doing interviews about what they hope the files will expose. Congressional committees are going to be preparing for hearings and investigations based on whatever the documents reveal. Trump's legal team is going to be in crisis mode, trying to prepare for the fallout and trying to develop strategies for minimizing damage from revelations they know are coming but can't fully predict. The anticipation itself is going to be damaging for Trump because it keeps the Epstein connection in the news cycle and keeps reminding people of Trump's months of resistance to releasing the files. And then when the actual documents drop, we're going to see weeks or months of rolling revelations as reporters and investigators work through tens of thousands of pages of material. Each new discovery is going to generate its own news cycle and its own round of political and legal consequences. The sustained nature of this scandal is going to make it impossible for Trump to move past or distract from the way he's sometimes managed with other controversies. The comparison to other political sex scandals is instructive in understanding how devastating the Epstein connection could be for Trump. We've seen powerful politicians destroyed by far less serious scandals, consensual affairs, inappropriate comments, allegations that turned out to be unsubstantiated. The Epstein case involves actual sex trafficking of minors, documented criminal activity, federal prosecutions, and convictions. If Trump is shown to have been significantly involved in or protective of that operation, the political fallout is going to be orders of magnitude worse than anything we've seen in modern American politics. This isn't going to be a scandal that blows over after a few news cycles, or that Trump can survive by attacking his accusers and claiming victimhood. This is going to be a permanent stain that defines his legacy and that makes political rehabilitation essentially impossible. Even if Trump somehow avoids criminal charges, which seems unlikely given the documentary evidence that's emerging, the political damage from association with Epstein's crimes is going to be catastrophic and lasting. History is going to remember Trump in the context of his Epstein connections, and that association is going to overshadow everything else he accomplished or tried to accomplish during his time in politics. Here's the bottom line as we wrap up what might be the most explosive scandal in Trump's already scandal-filled career. Trump was forced to sign the Epstein Files Transparency Act after months of resistance, and that legislation is going to result in the public release of tens of thousands of pages documenting Trump's connections to Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking network. Documents that have already been published show Trump spending significant time with Epstein, being discussed in correspondence as a protection asset, and being involved in ways that go far beyond casual social acquaintance. The files are expected to reveal information about pardons Trump granted to protect Epstein associates, immunity deals that shielded co-conspirators, and a broader network of powerful figures who facilitated or benefited from Epstein's crimes. The criminal exposure Trump faces from these revelations is potentially more serious than all his other legal troubles combined because sex trafficking charges carry life sentences, and because the documentary evidence is going to be overwhelming. The political damage is going to be catastrophic and could finally break even Trump's most loyal supporters because connections to child sex trafficking transcend partisan politics. Congressional investigations, media coverage, and public outrage are going to dominate headlines for months as documents get released and analyzed. The 30-day timeline means this story is going to accelerate rapidly with daily revelations leading up to and following the file dump. Trump's legal team has no effective strategy for defending against documentary evidence that Trump himself was forced to release, and the visceral nature of the underlying crimes makes public sympathy impossible. This could be the scandal that finally ends Trump's political career and that results in the most serious criminal charges he's ever faced. The question isn't whether the Epstein files damaged Trump, but whether that damage is merely political or extends to criminal prosecution and potential life in prison for conspiracy and obstruction related to sex trafficking crimes. Keep watching this story because the revelations over the next 30 days are going to be absolutely explosive and could reshape American politics in ways we can't fully predict right now.